In this unique video about the Cutlass, I want to talk a little bit more about the context, because it's important to note that back then and today as well, we have the problem that fighting on board a ship is very different compared to fighting in a fencing style or in a modern gym. And this is where the differences between the regular fencing stance and the regular fencing movements we normally do with the broadsword and the saber come into play. Because on board a ship, even a modern one, you cannot move like that. You cannot stand like that. It's just not possible. So to understand this context a little bit better, I show you some video footage of my friend and wrestling coach Zane, who works professionally on board a ship. So he has enough experience to live on board a ship, and he knows how to move on a ship, to not spill his tea or coffee, even when the sea is going quite strong. On this video you can see he tries out the regular fencing stance. So the L-shaped footwork, weight balanced more on the rear leg. In this case it is the left leg. And he tries just to stand and to hold his balance. And even though he's very experienced in living on a ship, he has a lot of problems, as you can see. The ship he's on is a modern ship, which has around the size of the Queen Anne's Revenge, the flagship of Captain Blackbeard. And keep in mind that a modern ship with a modern engine is not moving as heavily in this quite calm sea like a ship from the Age of Sail would do. You can see the sea in the back. It's not really heavy sea. It's pretty calm. The ship has obviously some speed going, but anyways, you can see he has really problems to keep his balance in a classical fencing stance. Now, when you switch to a deeper, more wrestling-like or MMA-like stance, as I showed it in the first lesson, he has a much more stable stance. And then you can see how he uses very small steps to move forward, not making wide lunges, but only small advanced steps. And he is very well balanced. So seeing how this works on board a ship and how to fight on board a ship. And now he has enough space, as you can see, in front and the back, over his head. Now imagine all this with a little bit rougher sea and also below the decks. And you can imagine how difficult it is to use regular fencing, classical fencing stances on board a ship with a Cutlass. Though in our next exercise, we first do some sparring, and both can move freely. So we use the room of our gym and we move freely. We can do whatever we want with our Cutlass, and we just fence like we would do with a broadsword without caring about circumstances on board a ship. This worked quite well. Now I switch more to the what I would call boarding-action approach with my Cutlass, while my sparring partner Peter is still doing the more classical fencing approach. As you can see, I'm very quick in a lot of trouble because I'm not really using the whole potential of my Cutlass, which I could do because of the circumstances, because I have space. So Peter obviously has the advantage here. So now he's also switching to more of a boarding-action approach. As you can see now, the sparring is quite even, but it might look a little bit awkward because you might be thinking, why are these guys doing so aggressive bashing, and why they, don't use the whole potential of the fencing. Now we change the circumstances and do an exercise which I call wall fencing. So we're fighting in a confined space. So we both have a small wall behind our backs. We have a wall on one side, and on the other side we have some freedom of movement. And it is not allowed to step too much out of this confined space. So if you want to traverse, you can do a little bit, but you're not allowed to just, go with a curve in an angle and just attack from the side. So you have to be more confronted with an opponent directly in front of you, having not enough space on your right side or your left side, depending on where you're standing. And then you have to fight from there. So you can clearly see when we change the circumstances, it is much easier to use this boarding action approach. It becomes more natural. It's not so easy to stand now in the typical classical fencing stance because you don't have enough space. You have to be careful with your moulinets. You have freedom on one side, depending on where you stand. So it's important in this drill to switch sides as well, depending if you're right-handed or left-handed. And you can see enclosing and commanding can happen quite quickly. So this is still not a ship because circumstances on board a ship are much worse. This room is not moving. It's not as dark as, on the deck of a ship. It has not so many distracting things lying around. It has much more space, especially above your head, but also on one side you have enough space. But it already gives you a pretty good idea of what you can expect when you fight in confined spaces on board of a moving old sailing ship. So as you can see, doing free sparring in this boarding action approach is quite difficult. First of all, it's difficult to switch to the mindset when you have space, and also if your opponent is not using it, or even if he's using the same approach, it is still hard to manage and to really bring the techniques to work. So best to try out different scenario drills and also try out different ideas of sparring, especially change the circumstances where you do sparring. So maybe you have a small alley, maybe you have a confined space somewhere in your room. Of course, take care of not hurting yourself or breaking something, because everybody knows who training swordsmanship. I mean, he who has not broken a lamp in his room while making swordsmanship or making a scratch into the ceiling, please raise your hand now, and I would say you're a liar. So keep these points in mind when we go through all the lessons, and keep these circumstances in mind when you train yourself. So thanks for watching, and see you in the next lesson.